Okay, so let's just maybe walk through the steps we took and see where Scripture talks about these steps. I didn't do this throughout the class. I used to do that and even maybe do this lecture at the beginning of the class, but it seemed really odd since we hadn't really made a case for Christianity to ask the question, is this biblical? So I've moved it towards the end. It seems to make more sense now that we've gotten here and made the case that Christianity is true, then kind of ask the question about the path we took to get here. So let's go back now and think through these steps, and I want to show you some verses where these steps are discussed in Scripture. Okay, in steps both 2 and 3, centered around the idea of miracles, right? So both 2 and 3 are similar in the sense that we're asking the question, how do we know if a message really is from God? How do we know that Jesus' message really is from God? How do we know that the entire Bible is a message from God? Or if somebody comes up to us on the street claiming to have a message from God, how do we know, since there's so many fakes and mistakes out there, how do we know what really is a message from God and what isn't? And the answer that we've always discussed in this class has been miracles. Miracles are the key way to know if a message really is from God or not. So we even referred to this as the miracle test. Now there's other reasons, other ways you can make the case that Jesus or the entire Bible is from God, but I think this is our strongest argument. This is the best test we have. It's not airtight, but I think it's a very strong test, this miracle test. So we can ask the question, when it comes to both step 2 and step 3, does the Bible also affirm this miracle test? As I said, we don't need the Bible to know the miracle test. I tend to talk to people and they affirm the miracle test, even if they're non-Christians or never read the Bible. It seems like the miracle test is something kind of almost maybe like moral truth that God has just built into our understanding of things. So even my debate with Dan Barker, the atheist that I debated at the Atheist Conference a couple of years ago, which, by the way, it looks like we've found a publisher for, so that'll be published as a book here shortly. I've been looking for a publisher for, over a year now, but just this week it sounds like a publisher is going to give us a green light, give us a contract on that. But in that debate that I had down in Florida a couple of years ago, the atheist I was debating pretty much affirmed the miracle test. So we don't need the Bible to know about the miracle test, but we can ask the question, does the Bible come along and affirm the miracle test? And now I'm going to make the case for several minutes that, in fact, it does. So sometimes, and this isn't exclusively with every presuppositionalist, but sometimes presuppositionalists, and this used to be part of my own thinking when I was presuppositionalist in my thinking, sometimes presuppositionalists will say, look, the Bible doesn't start out with reasons and evidence to believe in God or believe that the Bible is from God. The Bible just doesn't start that way. The Bible doesn't start out Genesis 1:1 with reasons and evidence to believe that there's a God or reasons and evidence to believe that the Bible is from God. No, the Bible just starts out Genesis 1:1 presupposing that there is a God, presupposing that the Bible is from Him. So it starts out, in the beginning, God. So since the Bible starts that way, we should start that way. We should start out, that's the most biblical approach. Again, this is what a presuppositionalist sometimes will argue. We should follow the Bible and just start out presupposing, just like Genesis 1:1 does, that there is a God and that the Bible is from Him. But as I was working through this process, as I was transitioning from presuppositionalism to more of a traditional approach, I came to realize that even though this is how the Bible begins, this is not how the Bible began. Let me say that again. Even though this is how the Bible begins, this is not how the Bible began. So think about this with me. Think about how the Bible began, how it first came about. The first author of the Bible was Moses. And when did Moses first hear from God? Well, it was at the burning bush. You remember that story in Exodus where God spoke to Moses through the burning bush? Now, one of the concerns that Moses had was, what if the Israelites don't believe me? What if I go back to the Israelites, go back to Egypt and talk to the Israelites and tell them that I got this message from God? What if they don't believe that I really heard from God? That was one of the concerns he expressed to God. Moses did. Dustin just covered this. Excuse me. And so you see this interesting conversation in Exodus 4 where God and Moses are talking about this issue. And God actually gave him evidence. God used that word himself, evidence. Obviously, this is our English translation of it. But God gave Moses the ability to do miracles as evidence he really had heard from God. And he goes through and explains several of those miracles. And so right from the very beginning, the very first time, at least in terms of the Bible being written and communicated to us, the first author, Moses, first time he heard from God, received a message from God, the way to authenticate that, to show to others that his message really was from God, it was through the miracle test. So from the very beginning, we see this, miracles functioning as evidence of the divine. And that's the primary purpose. That's the primary purpose. The Bible refers to miracles as the fingerprint of God. So that's the primary purpose of miracles, to authenticate a message or a messenger really does have information from God. Now, God spoke through Moses his entire life, right? He was a prophet, so God gave him messages and he passed them on to the Israelites. But when he was close to death, when Moses was passing off the scene, he gave instructions to the Israelites as to how they would know who and who wasn't a true prophet going forward. So you might remember this in Deuteronomy. Moses is talking to the people and he explains, look, when I'm gone, there's going to be all sorts of people that come to you claiming to have a message from God, but not all of them are going to be true prophets. Some of them are going to be false, fake prophets. So he says, how are you to know? He goes on to explain and tell them how they're going to know, how they're going to be able to discern which ones really have a message from God and which ones don't. In other words, he's going to point them to look at the evidence. This is in Deuteronomy 18, and in this context, he says miracles again. And specifically, he talks about prophesying of the future. A true prophet will have information from God about the future that will come true. So again, we see the miracle test being affirmed. And then this takes place all the way throughout the Old Testament and New Testament. The miracle test is affirmed over and over and over again. So I'll give you some just more examples of that quickly as we move through this. We see it come up again in Isaiah, where God says, submit your case, present your arguments. Let them come and tell us what will happen. He's talking about idols here. Tell us the past events so that we may reflect on them and know the outcome. Or tell us the future. Tell us the coming events, then we'll know that you really are gods. Now God is being sarcastic here. He's making fun of idols. But in a sense, he's saying, look, if these idols can tell the future, then we would know that they're real. And so God is affirming the miracle test in a backwards sort of way. Making fun of the idols because they can't tell the future, and therefore we know they're not truly divine. So what about Jesus? Why think that Jesus' message really is from God? Is it appropriate to take Jesus through this miracle test? Well, it seems as though Jesus himself said so. Jesus said to take him through the miracle test. He explains in John 10 that if he's in the context, his Father's works, he's discussing miracles here. But he says, if I'm not doing my Father's works, then don't believe me. But if I'm doing them, and you don't believe me, believe the works. In other words, look at the miracles I'm performing. This will help you know and understand that I and the Father are one. Another classic example is with John the Baptist, right? So you might remember John the Baptist, the guy who announced Jesus to the world. later in his life had doubts as to whether Jesus really was the Messiah. And this was when he was in prison, about to be beheaded, and he sent messengers to Jesus and said, "Are you really the one, or should we look for someone else?" And Jesus, what did he say? He said, "Look at the evidence." He sent messengers back to John and told him to consider what he has seen, and then goes on to describe the various miracles that he was performing. And then again, in the New Testament, we see this being affirmed, that in Acts 2:22, Jesus was attested to us by God with miracles, wonders, and signs. So that's the purpose of these miracles, to attest or affirm Jesus' message really what is from God. And then when it comes to the apostles, right, the disciples who wrote out and then affirmed the New Testament books, they had that same prophet status. We call them apostles, but they were prophets in the New Testament. Those two terms were kind of used interchangeably. But one of the marks of a true prophet or a true apostle is that they were able to perform signs, wonders, and miracles. Again, affirming that they really did have messages from God. Another example, again, the miracle test, once you're aware of it, it's one of those things where you just start seeing it everywhere. But here's another example in Hebrews 2. So after it, the message of salvation, was at first spoken through the Lord, it was confirmed to us by those who heard, God also testifying with them both by signs, wonders, and by various miracles.